Hello and welcome to Azure Live Mert to the Future. Today I have a very special guest, Gonzalo Bissio, will be with us today, and we will be talking about Azure SQL Managed Instance. So Gonzalo, welcome. How are you?
Hello, Mert. Thank you very much for having me here. Hello to all. Hola in Spanish. How are you?
I am fine, thank you. So before we start, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. I will do this in a couple of slides, but I can do this previously. My name is Gonzalo Bissio, as Mert mentioned. I am from Buenos Aires, Argentina, South Home. I am a data and AI specialist here in Microsoft. Yes, today I am at the office. So I mean, it's strange because normally I have a small T-shirt, I would say home style, but today, yes, I had to come here.
So great. Your expertise is very important because the database topic is mostly a hard topic, and there are different ways to host your SQL Server on Azure. For example, Azure SQL Server managed instance you can use on a VM or maybe on a container version. So, what we are going to talk about today?
Yes, today, I mean, we're going to cover one of the database services, a native one here in Microsoft, which is Azure SQL Managed Instance. I mean, I am working now in a technical pre-sales role in where we discuss these kind of things. Hey, I am using SQL Server on premises, or I am using SQL Server in a VM. That can be Azure VM, that can be EC2 VM or Google or whatever you have SQL Server. And the thing is, hey, what we can do to transform my database service. What can we do? I am always seeing that I need to patch my SQL Server. I am always seeing that I need to take care of the backups of my databases. I mean, every 4 to 5 years, I need to migrate my database to a newer version because I am losing support or I am not using the latest features. So what can we do? Well, one of the ways to transform your business on the database side is to use Azure SQL MI. I want to give you an introduction of this service, my experience, what will be the values of having this service, and that will be our story for today.
Okay, great. So let's start then.
Okay, thank you very much again for having me here.
You're
I'm very
welcome.
happy. So let's start talking about this beautiful service. I would say my favorite service, at least relational. As I mentioned before, Gonzalo Vicio, Buenos Aires, Argentina, data and AI specialist. The important thing there, you have my email, my contact. Yes, you will see that I will be seeing like or switching between my different monitors. So this is because I have the presentation on this side of me, but I will be switching my view. Important thing, as I mentioned, my email. In case that you have any question, you have any issue that I can help, feel free to drop me an email. So here we have our introduction to this beautiful service, Azure SQL Managed Instance. This is one of the newest service. This is native, Microsoft native. This is not that we are, I don't know, like in Databricks that we have a different vendor in the middle. No, here we have this service is from Microsoft directly. The product team is doing an amazing job here. They are adding features and features and features. I think that from my point of view, this is one of the features of SQL Server. Having this platform as a service, this I would say database platform because this is not only a service in where we can host our data. You know how important the data is today. You know that more companies are switching to the data-driven mode. Well, here is one of the places that you can host your database. We have three different options in Azure. We have the SQL VMs, normal VMs as you have today in on-premises. Then you have our option Azure SQL MI, which is almost 100% compatible with on-premise version. And then you have Azure SQL Database, which is a different option. This one was one of the first services released in Azure back in 2011, February, if I am not wrong. When Azure was released, this is one of the first services in where, I mean, there are some differences between Azure SQL MI and Azure SQL Database. But in case that you need a database as a service, in case that you want to just host a database and that's it, and you don't, for example, have to execute cross database queries or execute jobs or use service broker or, for example, database mail, Well, Azure SQL Database will not be the best option because, for example, for cross-database queries, you need to have an external service called Elastic Queries, the same for jobs like Elastic Jobs. And for example, you have a limitation Azure SQL Database for space, maximum 4 terabytes, in where in Azure SQL MI, you can have bigger databases. But anyway, I hope you can choose Azure SQL MI because I love it. Here you have the options, as I mentioned before, some introduction, some description that you can read afterwards. I will send you these slides, obviously. If you're not familiar to, what will be your responsibilities in case that you choose a service instead of a VM, that can be on premises, or again, that can be in Azure. So the thing is, we are here. Let me see if I enable some IT. No, I forget. Nice. Just one sec. Let me enable it so I can zoom so you can see. Yes. So here we have our option. Your only responsibility will be obviously the application, the data, and the features. But for example, you will not be, or you will not need to be care of backups. You will not be need to be care of patches. Everything will be patched automatically or automatically, as I like to say. The newer features will be tested first in Azure SQL MI, and then it will be released to on-premises or to SQL Server normal version. And then you have other comparisons with the other services. Let's go to the other one. Azure ARC. Why I am mentioning here Azure ARC if I am talking about Azure SQL Managed Instance? The thing is, let's say that, today on this modern world, we have some companies that because of some regulations cannot host their data in a cloud provider because of some local regulations or for some limitations or whatever. And let's say that you want to, because you hear me and you say, hey, I know that, or I think that Azure SQL MI is what I want. So I want to have this on my data center. What can I do? Well, one of the options that you have is to implement Azure Arc on your infrastructure, on your storage, on your data center. And you can use the benefit of Azure SQL Managed Instance. This is a very good option in case that you want to use your own hardware in order to use Azure SQL MI. Or you have the other option, which is Azure Stack, but that will be Microsoft hardware. That is not your hardware. But in case that you want to use your hardware because you say, hey, I have I would say, cloud adoption that I want to move forward, well, you can use. But I have this storage here. I have this virtualization here that I want to use. Well, you can use Azure Arc. That is another option. Service tiers, now introducing, I would say, the service. Why I am mentioning this? Because sometimes you think in a database that, hey, I have my database, I want to create this VM with these speakers, with this memory, with this IOPS or storage or whatever. Well, here we have two different worlds. One is general purpose, the other one is business critical. Whenever you create an Azure SQL MI service, you will see that you have these two options. What are the limits? Well, I would say the most important is the space, because in general purpose, as of now, it is in GA, 16 terabytes. Sometimes I know that the space will be a problem because, hey, my database is almost 3 terabytes. Well, I will recommend to go to 16. In business critical, 16 terabytes is in public preview, I would say, for one specific hardware generation. But as of now, in GA is 4 terabytes, the same as Azure SQL Database. Other difference is that in general purpose, you will be pointing your database to a remote blob storage, and on the business critical, you will have local storage, which will give you, I would say, better throughput on the storage side. Some other information, TempDB, internal high availability, the one that I am going to talk in a few slides, but that will be afterwards. Features. Yes.
Gonzalo, there is a comment. Can you see the chat section?
No.
Okay. Let me read it.
Sure.
Quote with Sean said, I am in a meeting in 2 hours to talk about DB options. This presentation is great timing. Any chance I can get a copy of the slide deck?
Sure. I will send it to Mert afterwards. I will send all the information to him.
And I will share it on my Twitter account.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Familiar features. One key thing from my point of view, one very important thing is that Azure SQL MI will allow you to restore a native backup. I mean, you can execute a backup on your database and you will be able to restore that backup in Azure SQL MI. From my experience, from my point of view, there is no better way to migrate a database rather than executing backup and restore. That's it. This is very critical for a service. Azure SQL database, even today, does not allow you to execute backup and restore, but Azure SQL MI, allows you. That for me is critical. You have different ways to migrate to Azure SQL MI. You can do online migrations using log replay services. There is a limit of 36 hours, but in case that you want to, with a single click, migrate your database, you can use log replay services. You can use database migration services. You can use backup restore. But for me, that native backup and restore is critical, and it's supported in Azure SQL MI. There are other features, one that I mentioned, cross-database queries. I know that sometimes that is important because, every time that we think about a database migration, we say, hey, because, what you are going to hear is very normal. I think that you heard this before, but it's like, hey, I have my database here. I want to move this database to there, and I want to just backup, restore, use the newer features, and I know that that database will work super fast. I assume that you hear that hey, we're going to use the new version of the database because it's better, blah 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 blah. Well, one of the advantages from my point of view for Azure SQL MI is that in case that you want to back up and restore and keep the same compatibility level, well, you can do the same. Hey, Gonzalo, we are using, I don't know, SQL 2017, SQL 2019, compatibility level 100. Can we do that? Well, the answer is yes. You can modify the compatibility level. This is not mandatory, and you can control that. In case that you want to use a different compatibility level, well, you will be able to do that. And some other things that I will show you later. I don't know if you are familiar with this beauty here called Query Store. This is a new feature back in SQL 2016, but in Azure SQL MI is enabled by default. In SQL Server until 2019, you need to enable Query Store. Now in SQL 2022, it will be enabled by default, but in case that you are using Azure SQL MI, you need to know that Query Store will be enabled. The same for automatic tuning. As I mentioned, 100% of compatibility. Another important thing is that if we think about cloud environment, we think about security. We know that security for the companies is critical, and more today having all of these different attacks from different entities. Well, we know that the data is one of the key things of every company. So the good thing for Azure SQL MI is that by default, this service is close to internet. So in case you want to connect from any of the sources to Azure SQL MI, you need to do this connection internally. You need to configure VNet peering, or you need to open the rules, but everything internally. This service will not be open to internet unless you want it. You need to manually configure the service to open it to internet. Another thing, Gonzalo, I have this application. I am using Windows Authentication. Will this work? Well, since last week, there is a public preview of Windows Authentication for service principals in Azure. So the option Windows Authentication will be supported or in GA soon. So now we can use this. This is very new because this was released last week, I think, more or less. But if you want to use a GA option, GA means general available option, you can use or SQL Authentication, user password, that's it, or Azure Active Directory. You can use managed identities, or you can use users, but only in Azure Active Directory, not in Active Directory. So in case that you don't have Azure and you want to use this authentication, you will have to deploy an Azure Active Directory and then an Azure SQL MI using this option. The one that I mentioned before, VNet support. This is how you will connect directly to the Azure SQL MI. This is critical for security. This is critical for connectivity. So in case that you have your service, your web app, or whatever you want to connect to Azure SQL MI, just make sure that you open the connection between the different VNets using the peering, for example. Um, Again, tiers here with more information in case that you want to review any specific case. You have the information here. You have the comparison between them. Hey, I want to know what is the database limit, for example, today 100, because I know that there are a bunch of systems that creates database based on their clients. For example, hey, I have a new client, I have a new database, and maybe you have a bunch of customers, and you're going to use more than 100 database. So be careful because on that limit, because it happened to me that, hey, Gonzalo, I created this service that you talk a lot. I know that you love it, but I am having this limitation. Well, that is one of the limitations. So in case that you want to deploy Azure SQL MI, just take a look here. You will have more information on the limits. I mentioned limits, for example, database. I mentioned limits about the size of the storage assigned to the service. So, well, here you have a table with some information about, hey, how many IOPS will general purpose give it to me? Well, here you have the table. Based on the database size, file size, I would say, you will get a fixed number of IOPS. So in case that you need more IOPS, you will have to increase that file. So in case that you have that problem that you see that, hey, I have a throughput problem, well, here you have, or here you will know, hey, my database is only 10 gig in size, but I am not getting the IOPS that I need. Well, you will have to increase up to 129, for example. So you can go to the second limit. So you will get 2,300 IOPS. So be careful on that. Backups. I know that this is a huge problem for the DBAs. I was a DBA for almost 15 years and I had to, you don't imagine how many words I have with this because the backups are not working, because the backups are affecting my application, because they are running in a daily basis and I don't want that. So, well, all of those headaches will disappear because that is our responsibility now. So you will not need to care about the backups. Another important thing is we talked about regulations. We talked about, hey, I want to use Azure SQL MI. Okay, but normally there are some regulations that force you to keep the backups for 10 years, for example, or 5 years, or 1 year, 2 years, whatever. Is there any way that I can keep them? Yes, the answer is yes. You can, I mean, the default backup retention is 35 days, but in case that you want to increase this limit up to 10 years, you have the possibility to do that. But remember that by default, your backups will be kept for 35 days. In case that you want to increase, as I mentioned, you have long-term backup retention that you can increase. Obviously, this has an extra cost, but that will be another story. Replication. Another thing that I know a bunch of people that loves replication. In case that you want to use replication, you will be able to use it as a publisher, as a distributor, or as a subscriber. All of the different flavors will work on the replication. Only obviously transactional, not merge, not peer-to-peer, etc., etc. Another thing that is supported here in Azure SQL MI is link servers. I know that link servers are being used a lot, but a very important thing is that the link servers must point to a SQL source. In case that you have, for example, an Oracle, in case that you have, or you need to use ODBC because you have other database engine, that will not work. But in case that you want to connect different Azure SQL MI using link server, you can use that. Azure SQL MI, Azure SQL Database, SQL Server, all of those will work. Service broker, database mail, as I mentioned before. But let's say that you are on the situation that, hey, Gonzalo, today is critical to me. We have our main day, Black Friday, I don't know, Black Monday, or whatever you have on your business, and we need to scale up our system. What can we do? Is there any automatic scaling? The answer is no. There is no automatic scaling. Let's say that you want to use, I don't know, an automatic process to say, hey, my managed system needs more records. I want to use more. What will happen on this process? Can you do that? The answer is yes. How long will it take that change? Depends. If you are using general purpose or if you're using business critical, the time can be different. More or less, it can take up to 3 hours, more or less. That means that my system will be down 3 hours. The answer is no. Why? Because let's say that you are adding more vehicles. Let's say that you have 4 and you want 8. In parallel, a new infrastructure will be created, the synchronization will start, and the only time that you will have your downtime between quotes is when the failover happens between these two different architectures. That can be seconds because the downtime is minimal. But the problem is the time that it will take to assign more resources. So be careful with that. If you're going to use Azure SQL MI, I will recommend you. I know that we have the price in the middle. I know that we have cost in the middle, honestly, but just be careful or try to use more vehicles or to assign more vehicles to the one that you identify before, because this will take time. Otherwise, I mean, you can just start the scale up process or the scale down, even because you can or scale up or scale down. One of the questions that I often receive is, hey, Gonzalo, can I stop the service because I want to save cost? The answer is no. We're going to talk about cost in a few. But one of the questions that I receive very often is that, hey, can I pause this? Can I stop the service so I can save cost? As of now, the answer is no. Soon you will have news because as of now it's in private preview. I cannot tell too much, but soon you will have news about that. Instance pool. Another thing that happened to me is that, hey, Gonzalo, you know, I have this Azure SQL MI in production, but I have this in staging or in dev. But in production, I am using 8 cores, and in dev, I am using 2 because, you know, we need to save cost. And the question is, okay, how can you test if your process will work fine in production if you don't have the same resources? Okay, I will use 8 cores. But what about now development? You know, I want to do the test before doing the testing in QA before going to pro. One way to save costs in development environment is to use what we call instance pool, meaning that you can just purchase or you can reserve an Azure SQL MI with 16 cores, let's say, but internally you can create small Azure SQL MI zone, so more than one team can work with this Azure SQL MI. So instead of paying, for example, 8 Azure SQL MIs, you pay only for one in 16, but internally you will be using or you will be splitting the Azure SQL MI in smaller Azure SQL MIs. In that case, you can save cost because you will be paying for 16, but internally you are not going to pay for 16 difference. It's in preview. I think that this one will be in GA by the end of the year. I use this for some customers because they were having different teams or different application teams, and they didn't want to pay everything separate. So they want to share. It's like a resource governance between quotes, but for managed instance. Different limitations. I love trace flags. You can enable some trace flags in Azure SQL MI in case that you want. Here you have the roadmap in case that, hey, what will be new soon? I promise you there are a bunch of things coming in Azure SQL MI. Hot topic, costs. Very often I receive this question, hey, Gonzalo, I want to save costs because we are in the cloud, you know, I need to save cost. Okay, what can we do in Azure SQL MI? In Azure SQL MI, we have 3 ways. The first one will be, okay, we want to save storage. The storage honestly is cheaper in Azure SQL MI. That is not expensive. But let's say that you are using a bunch of storage. You want to save some space. Okay, one of the way is to use column store or use compression in order to save some space and shrink the database one time. Let's say that you are able to shrink your database to 50%, 60%, and you remove storage from the service. Another way will be to use the Azure Hybrid Benefit. What Azure Hybrid Benefit means? This means that you will be able to move your license from on-premises to Azure. But how? Sometimes I remember that when I was a customer before joining Microsoft, I heard this and it was like, hey, we're going to save a bunch of money, but how? What can we do? Well, there is an Azure Hybrid Benefit calculator. as you can see the ratio here, that let's say that you are going to use in general purpose 4 vCores. But in order to apply to this benefit, what do I need? Well, here, as you can see, is the link. Let me see if I can open it so I can show you live. Yes, it's here. So here you will say, okay, I'm going to create my Azure SQL MI in East US here, a single instance, because we are not going to use pools, instance pools. We're going to use general purpose. We're going to use 4 cores. And here it will tell you, hey, how many licenses do I need? How many cores on that license? You know that we have a standard, you know that we have enterprise in SQL Server. So what do I need in order to apply this? Well, in case that you want to use 4 general purpose vCores, you will require at least one license, one standard license per vCore. In case that you want a business critical, that ratio will be a little different. But in case that, oops, sorry, I have a problem. In case that you want to use general purpose and you have an enterprise edition license, this will save you up to 4 cores in general purpose. So if you have available one license, one enterprise SQL Server edition license, it will, you will be able to use up to 4 vCores in general purpose. That will be automatically, it will be up to 50% of the cost. You always can use the Azure Calculator in order to see, hey, if I am using or if I am going to use this Azure SQL MI with these vCores, what will be the cost? And you will see it. I don't know if you're familiar with the Azure Calculator, but let me open it very quickly. Calculator. 1 second. I am opening my Azure Calculator. And here you will see. This one is the Azure Calculator. If you want to calculate how are you going to spend, you choose first the service, which is Azure SQL Managed Instance, this little guy here. Below, you will see that the new tab will be open for Azure SQL Managed Instance. Here, you need to specify all the information. And here, you will see the monthly cost. Here, you will see 2 different options. One is hybrid benefit, and the other one is reservation, the one that I'm going to talk in a few. But as you can see here, you're going to save a lot if you enable this, because you will not be paying licenses. Sometimes I receive the question, hey, what will be the license cost? I mean, sometimes you will hear that, hey, this is Azure, these are services. What is the license cost? Well, here we don't have license because always you will be paying for a fee for the service itself. But internally, you can, as I showed you before, you can add some discounts based on the Azure hybrid benefit. So now let's go to the other one, which is reservations. What does it mean, Azure reservation? Well, let's say that you say, hey, I know that I am going to use this service starting now up to 5 or 10 years. The reservation is up to 3. You say, hey, I know that I am going to use an Azure SQL Managed Instance inside this subscription in Azure. I want to enable a reservation because I know that I am going to use it. What will be the benefit? Well, obviously the price will be down up to, again, 30 to 40% more or less, adding also the Azure hybrid benefit, because you are saying, hey, I am going to use this, so please add the discount. How you do that? You need to be, let me see what I'm going to show you. Azure Reservations. Let me see, because this one is taking reservations. Here, on your subscription, you say, hey, I want to reserve an Azure SQL MI inside my subscription. Obviously, I don't have access because this one is my Microsoft subscription, but here you will see all of the different services and you can choose Azure SQL Managed Instance. Again, you can see on the Azure Calculator, what will be the impact on adding these two benefits? More or less 50 to 60%, more or less, of discount. Any question there? No, right?
And I have a question, but I am not sure you are going to talk about it.
Sure.
Do you have any topic for migration?
Not migration itself, because we can talk hours about migration. I think that
Yeah, sure.
if I have some slides, but I mean, if you have any particular question in migration, just let me know and I can answer it to you. Because migration, it's a very beautiful topic. As I mentioned at the very beginning, one of the good things about using a service is that this will be one way. You migrate and that's it. Bye-bye. You don't need on the next 3 to 4 years to migrate this again. In case that you want to roll back, starting SQL 2022, you will be able to restore an Azure SQL MI backup into your SQL server, into your SQL VM. That can be on premises, AWS, whenever you are. But starting SQL 22, you can roll back. So that is an amazing thing too. But in case that you have any migration question, just shoot it. No worries.
Okay, thank you.
High availability. This is a very interesting topic because sometimes we receive requests from our customers saying, hey, I know that this is a service. I know that you are saying, hey, this service will be always up, but what will happen if your service is down? What happened? We have some internal high availability, I would say. This is by default. This is on the service itself. I'm going to show you in a few. But what will happen if my entire region is down? What can I do? How can I protect my service? So here you have different options. You have the one that I mentioned, at least internally on the same region, using business critical, or internally in general purpose, more or less there is some, I would say, some features that will protect the service. The some redundant, if you hear about that service in where Microsoft will deploy some different nodes across different zones inside the same region. For Azure SQL MI, more or less, it is targeting to be in private preview, more or less July, August. It is not yet available. In Azure SQL DB, you can do that, having different nodes in different zones. But here you will have multiple nodes on the same zone. Again, please do not use transactional replication as your high availability solution. I heard that term a bunch, but transactional replication is you are just replicating data. You are not protecting your service in an outage, just in case. Internally, what are our options? Well, in one side, we have the general purpose in where you have different active compute nodes. Imagine that these are small VMs supporting your service. You have a different pool of redundant nodes in case that something happens. Let's say that this node is down, automatically this node will come up and it will be moved to the active pool. What will happen in the middle? Downtime. In the middle of this process, and when this one of the VMs is down and the other one is moved to the active pool, there is a little downtime, couple of seconds. This is by default. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to change a connection string. You don't need to do anything. This is in general purpose, but what do we have in business critical? Well, in business critical, we have a technology called availability group, always on, always on, always on availability group. I know that people love to say always on or availability group, whatever you want to say. We have an availability group up to 4 nodes. What does it mean? Okay, we have this feature. We know that if something happened to the primary, because we are using availability group, we know that there will be a failover from here to here. That is how availability group works. But what if we don't just want to protect our service, but we want to execute reads in a secondary replica in order to move this read traffic from one node to another one? Can we do that? The answer is yes. Do I have to do anything to enable this? The answer is no. Everything is enabled automatically. Will there be any extra cost? The answer is no. Everything is included. What do I need to do? Gonzalo, tell me. I mean, you are saying that I don't need to enable anything. You are saying that everything is added to the service automatically. What do I need to do? Well, basically, you need to use two different connection string attributes. One is the famous initial catalog, and the other one is application intent read only, because you need to say, hey, this connection will only execute read operation. So then Azure SQL MI knows, and then that connection will be moved to the secondary. But everything is included automatically. Since I mentioned the some redundant thing, what will happen in the future? For example, you will have this one in one zone, this one in another zone, the same for these two. So you're going to have different nodes in different zones. So in case that something happens to one zone, well, at least you are protected. But at the very beginning, you say, hey, but if I want to protect my service for an outage downtime or an outage issue or whatever is happening on the region, what can I do? The other way that you have is something called auto failover groups. Um, Obviously, internally, it's the same technology, it's availability group. But what we are doing, or one of the requirements of auto failover group, is to have a copy in a different region. You cannot host one of the nodes on the same region. So basically, you say, hey, I am in, I don't know, West Europe, and I want to move to North Europe. Can I do that? The answer is yes. But if I want to have both nodes between quotes on the same region, can I do that? The answer is no, because when you choose the Azure SQL MI, it would say, hey, you cannot host the Azure SQL MI on the same region. Will the failover be automatically? The answer is yes. There are some recommendations. I have one session about only about high availability and auto failover group that maybe we can discuss with some details. Okay, important. You will have a listener every time that we use availability group. You know that you need to use a listener in order to connect always to the primary. But here you can use a secondary listener for read-only operations. So you move your read from one region to another one. Let me do a quick stop for questions.
Yes,
If you don't
may
have
I
any
ask
question,
one? Yes, I have one question.
sure.
So, what challenges may I face while using Azure SQL MI?
What, sorry?
What challenges may I face?
um, Based on my experience, sometimes it's difficult the thing of connecting to Azure SQL MI, because sometimes the services are developed in different VNets, and sometimes connecting from one VNet to another one is challenging. The same for the authentication. I know that sometimes it's difficult to convince people to do changes because, hey, everything is working. Why I am touching this? Authentication sometimes is hard because, hey, but Windows authentication worked before and now it's not working. What do I need to do? How can I authenticate to my service? What can I do? And then you need to know the service as much as you can. For example, if you want to monitor your service, because sometimes we work with operation and say, hey, where is my monitor tool? What can I do? Yes, you can use, for example, System Center in case that you're using today, or SCOM. You can use that because, I mean, from my point of view, it's the best option based on the number of events that SCOM is tracking. But also you have some metrics on the portal. I would say if you're talking about performance, there are some counters that you need to know, that you need to, I would say, to learn. So one of the big challenges is, I would say, the service adoption, to say, hey, I know that we have, for example, the ilities like maintainability, availability, etc., etc. But one of the big challenges that I faced normally with companies is to introduce them to the service. Don't be afraid because it's a service. I know you have some control. You must maintain your database, please. You need to run maintenance. You need to rebuild your indexes. You need to update statistics. But sometimes I think that the fear of the change, that is a problem also. And that's it.
Okay, great. And I have one last question.
Sure.
At the beginning, you say the different versions of using SQL Server on Azure, for example, VM, Azure SQL, and MI. Is there a specific scenario that you can say you must choose MI for this?
Yes, I mean, that is a very often question that I also receive because, hey, you are saying that this one is 100 compatible, but what are the scenarios that you say, hey, I don't think that Azure SQL MI is a good idea or is a fit, I would say? Well, for example, for those databases that has more than 16 terabytes or more than 11, 12 terabytes, because if you rebuild an index, you need extra space in order to rebuild that index, so you will not have more space. Another scenario can be if you're using file tables or file stream, because today is not supported. Um, let me think. Any other scenario? If you have any specific version of service broker that is not supported, but I think that the major answer will be it depends on the scenario, uh, when it will be better. I mean, today I think that Azure SQL MI is close to be almost the same as having the SQL Server in on-premises. Today is not, because if I tell you, hey, move this database from here to there, and that's it, I will say no, that is not a good approach. I would say, hey, first run the data migration assistant just to make sure that everything is working, that everything is supported before moving to Azure SQL MI. I think there are some limitations that will be fixed soon that will not allow you to move, I would say. But yes, I mean, except for the space, except for example, I know that there are some systems that are using, I don't know, 4 cores, but are using 128 gigabytes of memory. Can you have the same here? The answer is no, because whenever you choose a number of vCores, you have a fixed amount of memory based on the hardware series that you choose. So in case that you have, for example, not too many virtual cores, but you have a bunch of memory, that can be another case, because today you have more or less 5.1 gigabytes per vCore. So in case that you need more memory, I think that that will not be a good choice, but depends. We have a bunch of scenarios. I don't think that I can cover all of them, or I am not remembering now.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you for your presentation. It was great, and I really enjoyed it and learned to my stuff for myself. And hopefully, everyone thinks like me. And let's wait a minute for any questions from the audience,
Okay,
if it's okay for you.
I will continue. No worries. I have some stuff also.
Okay.
New things, as I mentioned. Um, what is coming? I would say a bunch. I mentioned about the Windows Authentication thing. In SQL 2022, there will be a huge change, which was released, I think, like 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, also to supporting SQL 2016, which is linking your VM in Azure on premises or whenever you have it to Azure SQL MI using availability group. I will show you. Let me see if this one open. I will show you live because I have it. 1 second. I am searching my connection to Bastion. 1 second, because for some reason this was closed. So now you will be able to connect Azure SQL MI and your VM, and you can, well, one of the things that we talk about migrations is that you will be able to execute the failover, and that's it, using availability group. Let me see if this open. Here it is. Something happened here. Reconnect. Nice. Okay. Wait, something happened. Okay. If I click here, okay. So how you will connect to Azure SQL MI is honestly very easy. You will see that you're going to use the Management Studio. Wait, that I need to. 1 second. I will show you how you can get the endpoint. Let me see if this is working. Here you will see host. This will be the link that you will need to use in order to connect. Let me see if this works. I hope. Yes, it worked. Nice. But let me show you also. I can't remember if I have this one. Yes, synchronize. So basically, this one is my VM. I am using SQL 2019 CU15 because this was released for that particular CU onwards. And you will see here that I will have this information here. I have a distributed availability group between my VM and my Azure SQL MI, as you can see. I mean, you will be able to see, this is very honestly, very simple to set up this in order to connect both worlds, I would say. And as you can see, I have my local machine and Azure SQL MI. I need to log in, etc., but at least I wanted to show you that you will be able to, in fact, execute reads. So, for example, this one is my Azure SQL MI service. And let's say that I want to execute, I will create a table. So I want the adventure works go. If I execute, for example, create table, blah, blah. 1, 2, 3. If I execute this, you will see what will happen. As you can see, it's read-only because it's a secondary. So what will happen if I execute and create the same here? I will create the same here. This will work. But now, if I, for example, yes, I know this is not correct, but come on, it's a session. Don't be bad with me. As you can see, the table is here. It's almost real time. It's near real time, but with a couple of seconds. This one is one of the new features. It's called this link, as you can see. This is one of the main challenges that Microsoft wants to achieve. Hey, I mean, we know that we have this work. We know that we have VMs. We know that we need to connect VMs with services. Okay, what are we doing with relational services? In this case, Azure SQL MI. Well, we are connecting the VM with Azure SQL MI. Can you do this with your on-premises VM? The answer is yes, you can. As long as you have connection between the source and the Azure SQL MI, this will work. This one is a new feature, as you can see. Can I execute a failover? Well, the answer is yes, but I will break everything. And I don't want to break it, you know. As you can see here, this one is my Azure SQL MI link. And here I have the failover part. I can click and I can very quickly execute the failover. I need to sign in, etc. But I want to show you that very quickly we can move from VM to Azure SQL MI. One of your questions can be, hey, Gonzalo, can I fail back from Azure SQL MI to the VM? On this phase, the answer is no. You can just go. You can just migrate from this VM to Azure SQL MI. You will not be able to roll back. So important thing, in case that you fail over, you will not be able to execute a backup and restore the database because Azure SQL MI is always one version up, the latest SQL version. So be careful with that. Small thing. Well, this one is a technology being used behind bars. Defender, in case that you need security, etc. New hardware series, I mentioned that we have here 5.1 Beaker, a maximum of 400 gigabytes of memory. There are two new series, Premium and Memory Optimized, in where you have more ratio per Beaker on the memory side. This one is to solve one of the problems that I mentioned about needing more memory for your service. In case that you need more, the ratio is higher here. Obviously, it's not more cheaper having more memory, so be careful with that. And the other thing that I mentioned is about the size. The only hardware series that is allowed to have 16 terabytes in public preview is this one. It's Memory Optimized Premium Series. The other one, as it's mentioned here, this one have 1 more terabyte. This is in preview, and this one is in GA. 4 terabytes for business critical, and 16 for GA, for general purpose. Parallel backup, some announcements. You can see them. One of the cool things, this one was released last week. You will be able to copy natively instead of restoring database between different Azure SQL MI. You will be able to use this copy command in order to restore database inside different Azure SQL MIs, or in case that you want to move them without executing, again, backup and restore, you can use the move command. This one is pretty cool. And I think that is the last part of the question because we have 4 minutes. Any other question?
No, that's great. And
I think that I am, yes. I love Rocky Balboa. Yes, I am a huge Rocky Balboa fan, so my gift must be here. So again, you have my contact. I will send this to you, Bert, so you can send it to the person that asked for my slides.
okay,
Thank you
great.
very much for having me here. It was
You are
a
welcome.
huge honor. And if you receive any
you.
additional question, just forward it to me and I will help to the person that needs anything.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining me today,
Okay.
and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.